Forced to marry an old cattle baron, the quiet cowboy who changed her fate, Clara had always lived a quiet life in a small, sun-baked town where everyone knew each other. Her days were filled with small routines, simple chores, and the occasional laughter with her friends at the market or by the river. She loved the small joys, sunlight glinting on the water, the scent of fresh bread from the bakery, and the gentle sound of birds in the morning. But beneath that simple life, Clara carried dreams that she never dared to speak out loud. She wanted adventure, freedom, and a life shaped by her own choices, not by the heavy expectations of others. Her father, a man weighed down by debts and worry, had always insisted on making practical decisions for the family. To him, dreams were dangerous distractions. Money and stability mattered far more than feelings or happiness. So when the opportunity arose to arrange Clara's marriage to Ethan, a wealthy cattle baron from a distant county, her father did not hesitate. Ethan was known across the region for his wealth, his vast ranch, and his stern demeanor. He was much older than Clara, and his name often carried a mix of respect and fear among the townsfolk. To Clara, he was a stranger, a man whose life and habits she could barely imagine. When her father first spoke the words, Clara felt as if the ground beneath her had shifted. "You will marry Ethan," he said with certainty, as if her feelings did not exist. "It is for the family, it is for your future." Clara tried to protest, tried to voice her confusion and fear, but her father's voice drowned hers. It was not a conversation, it was a decree. In that moment, she realized that her dreams, her plans, and even her heart had no place in the decision that would shape her life. Packing her few belongings, Clara felt a heaviness she had never known. Every item she touched, her favorite books, the letters she had written to herself, the simple dress her mother had stitched for her, felt like a reminder of the life she was leaving behind. She could feel the eyes of neighbors and friends upon her as she prepared to leave, their whispers following her like shadows. Some offered sympathy, others judgment, but Clara could barely focus on their voices. All she could hear was the steady thrum of fear in her chest, a fear of the unknown and the life that had been thrust upon her. The journey to Ethan's estate was long, passing through fields, dusty roads, and small towns that seemed even smaller than her own. Clara sat quietly in the carriage, staring out at the passing scenery, her thoughts drifting between regret and a small flicker of hope that perhaps life might hold unexpected kindness. But deep down, she could not shake the dread. Every mile felt like a mile away from herself, from the life she had known and the freedom she had cherished. When the carriage finally arrived, Clara was struck by the sheer size of Ethan's ranch. The land stretched for miles, dotted with fields, barns, and herds of cattle grazing peacefully under the sun. The main house was a grand structure of wood and stone, with tall windows that gleamed in the afternoon light. Clara felt like an intruder in a world too large and too powerful for her to belong. The servants moved quietly around her, their expressions polite but reserved, and the air carried the scent of horses, hay, and the wide-open land. Meeting Ethan for the first time was nothing like Clara had imagined. He was a tall, imposing figure with a strong presence that made the room feel smaller. His eyes were sharp, but his expression remained unreadable, giving away little of what he was thinking. He spoke with a deep, calm voice, polite but distant, and though he welcomed her, there was a stiffness in his words that reminded Clara of the distance between them. She felt the weight of the expectations pressing down upon her. This was not a man she could know easily, nor a life she could navigate freely. The early days were the hardest. Clara had to learn the rhythms of the ranch, waking early to the sounds of animals, the clatter of hooves, and the vast quiet of the fields. She felt awkward and out of place, unsure of how to move or act in this new world. Even simple chores that she had done back home seemed strange here, performed on a scale so large that she struggled to keep up. Every corner of the estate reminded her that she was no longer the girl from the small town. She was a guest in a place that had been built long before her arrival. The townsfolk who visited the ranch spoke of Ethan with respect, sometimes fear, and Clara began to understand the stories she had heard in passing. People whispered of his strict rules, his sharp mind, and the way he ran his land with precision. Some said he had little time for kindness, that he valued work over people, and that emotions were a distraction he could not afford. Clara felt small in the presence of such expectations. She missed her home, her family, and the quiet certainty of a life where she could make her own choices. But even in those first days, small moments of beauty found their way to her. The morning sun over the fields, the gentle lowing of cattle, and the quiet hum of life on the ranch offered a strange kind of comfort. Clara found herself drawn to the rhythm of the land, the way it demanded care and attention, but also gave back in its own way. She realized that the ranch was not just Ethan's world. It was a living place, full of challenges and small wonders, and she was slowly becoming part of it, whether she wanted to or not. Clara's loneliness was deep, but it was not empty. She observed the people who worked the ranch, learning their routines, their humor, and their ways of supporting each other in silence. She began to see the hierarchy, the bonds between workers, and the unspoken respect that Ethan commanded. It was a world of discipline and responsibility, and Clara understood that surviving here required patience, humility, and courage. As the days passed, Clara also began to notice the smaller details that made life on the ranch unique. The way the light shifted over the fields at dusk, the sound of horses in the barn, the careful handling of each animal, and the subtle kindnesses of those who worked quietly behind the scenes. She realized that even in a life that felt forced upon her, there were moments of learning, discovery, and quiet beauty. Yet, fear remained. She worried about how to navigate Ethan's expectations, how to find her own voice in a house so large and a world so unfamiliar. Her dreams of freedom felt distant, almost impossible, and she sometimes wondered if she would ever feel joy again. But amid the uncertainty, Clara discovered something unexpected: resilience. Each day, as she faced new challenges, she learned a little more about her own strength. She realized that even when life imposed limits, there was still a way to endure, observe, and adapt. By the end of the first month, Clara had begun to carve out a small space for herself within the Grand Ranch. She still felt the weight of her forced marriage, the fear of the unknown, and the sadness for the life she had left behind. But she also felt the beginnings of understanding, an awareness of the people, the land, and the routines that now surrounded her. She learned that life, even when dictated by others, could still be observed, respected, and eventually shaped in small, quiet ways. Every night, as she looked out over the fields from the tall windows of the main house, Clara allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of her past, her small town, and the dreams she had held close to her heart. She thought of her fears, her doubts, and the uncertainty of the future. And she thought, too, of the possibility that perhaps, in this vast, unexpected world, there might be moments of light, courage, and even kindness waiting for her to discover. The first part of her journey was not one of happiness, but of awakening. Clara had been thrust into a life she had not chosen, but she had survived the first steps. She had faced fear, loneliness, and the weight of expectation, and she had not broken. In this new world of sprawling fields, quiet workers, and the looming presence of Ethan, Clara began to understand the truth of life. Even when the path is forced upon you, strength, awareness, and small moments of hope can carry you forward. And so Clara's story began, not with joy, not with freedom, but with courage, patience, and the quiet determination to survive, learn, and perhaps, one day, to find her own way. She was alone in many ways, yet not powerless. And in that delicate balance of fear and resilience, the first chapter of her life at the ranch unfolded, full of uncertainty, but also the faint glimmer of possibilities that she had yet to discover. Life on the ranch began to feel less like a punishment for Clara, and more like a world she had to understand if she wanted to survive. Every day, the sun rose early, painting golden streaks over the fields and awakening the sounds of the ranch. Cows lowed softly, horses shifted in their stables, and the quiet movements of workers carrying tools and supplies created a rhythm that slowly, Clara began to notice. She moved with caution, careful not to make mistakes that might draw unwanted attention, but she also began to watch and learn, curious about the life around her. It was during one of these mornings, as Clara carried water buckets to the stables, that she first noticed Luke. He was a young man, perhaps not much older than Clara herself, tall and lean, with calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. He moved with quiet efficiency, attending to the horses, brushing their coats, checking their harnesses, and whispering softly to them as if they could understand every word. There was a gentleness in his actions that made Clara pause. She had expected everyone on the ranch to be rough, cold, or distant like Ethan, but Luke was different. He had a calm presence, a steady patience that felt almost like a soft anchor in the chaos of her new life. Luke noticed her too, of course. But unlike Ethan, he did not stare with judgment or expectation. Instead, he offered a small nod, a brief smile, and continued his work. At first, Clara felt awkward, unsure if she should approach him or retreat. The world of the ranch seemed so large and intimidating that even small interactions felt complicated. But over the following days, their paths continued to cross, in quiet moments near the barns, the stables, and the edges of the pastures. Each time, Luke acknowledged her presence with a polite nod or a soft word, never intrusive, never demanding. One afternoon, Clara struggled to lead a frightened horse back into the stable. She had grown accustomed to many chores, but handling the animals was still terrifying. The horse pulled away, stamping its hooves, and Clara's heart raced. Before she could react further, Luke appeared silently at her side, guiding the horse gently with a calm voice and firm hands. Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. He said nothing about her struggle, offered no criticism, just helped her until the animal was calm and secure. "Thank you," Clara whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Luke only nodded. "It's all right, they're just nervous. You'll get used to it." His voice was quiet but steady, the kind of voice that reassured rather than commanded. There was no pride in his words, no desire to seem superior, only calm understanding. Clara was surprised at how much she felt a spark of trust toward him, even though she barely knew his name. Days turned into weeks, and Clara began noticing more of Luke's presence. He was everywhere yet nowhere, always observing quietly, helping without asking, guiding without interfering. He noticed when she struggled with tasks, when she seemed lost in thought, and when her spirits sank. And somehow, without speaking much, he offered comfort. Sometimes it was as simple as handing her a towel when she sweated under the hot sun, or opening the barn door for her so she could escape the afternoon heat. Small gestures, but each one carried a weight of kindness that Clara had not experienced in a long time. One evening, as the sky blazed orange and pink, Clara found herself walking along the edge of the pastures, trying to escape the suffocating feeling that her life was dictated by others. Luke was there, tending to a fence, and he glanced up when she approached. For the first time, he spoke more than a single sentence. "You look tired," he said simply. Clara hesitated. No one had ever noticed the quiet exhaustion in her eyes before. "I am," she admitted. "It's a lot to adjust to," he nodded slowly. "It is, but you're learning. You'll be okay." There was no condescension, no attempt to reassure her with empty words. His tone was sincere, grounded in observation rather than sympathy. Clara found herself feeling lighter, as if the simple acknowledgement of her struggle was enough to make it less daunting. Over the following weeks, Clara and Luke began to spend more time in shared spaces, though always cautiously. They worked side by side in the fields, she learning how to manage tools and cattle, he silently correcting her when necessary but never harshly. He shared stories of the ranch, of the animals, and of the quiet routines that made life here possible. He spoke of his family long ago, of his love for the land, and of the small joys that kept him going despite hardships. Clara listened, captivated by the simplicity and honesty of his words. Through Luke, Clara began to see the ranch differently. It was not just a place of wealth and power, but a living, breathing world with its own challenges and beauty. The animals were not just property, they were lives to care for. The workers were not just laborers, they were people with hopes, fears, and stories. And Luke, quiet and unassuming, was a bridge to this new perspective. He showed her that there could be dignity and satisfaction even in hard work, even when life was difficult. Yet, Clara was careful with her feelings. She knew she could not let herself grow too attached, not while she was bound to Ethan in a marriage she had not chosen. Her heart longed for freedom, for love, for a life where she could make her own decisions. But Luke's presence introduced a strange new emotion, trust, warmth, and the faintest hint of companionship. It was confusing and thrilling, but also dangerous in its simplicity. Clara reminded herself repeatedly that she must remain cautious. Then came the day of the first major crisis on the ranch. A sudden storm rolled in from the west, darkening the sky and lashing rain against the barns and pastures. Clara had never seen such power in nature, and she panicked as she watched the cattle become frightened, running in confusion. She tried to help, but her movements were clumsy, and her fear made her hands shake. Luke appeared almost instantly, his presence calm and commanding. He guided her through the chaos, instructing her on how to secure the animals and protect the property. For the first time, Clara saw Luke in action in a way that left no doubt about his skill, courage, and quiet strength. He moved with confidence, speaking in low, steady tones to both people and animals. Clara was in awe, realizing that here was someone who had dedicated his life to the land, someone who could act decisively without needing to boast or command attention. It was inspiring, and she felt a growing admiration for him that went beyond simple gratitude. When the storm finally passed, the ranch was largely unharmed, thanks in large part to Luke's leadership. Clara was exhausted, soaked, and still trembling, but she felt a new kind of respect for herself as well. She had faced fear and chaos and had survived, guided by someone who had no need to control her, only to help her learn and adapt. That night, as she dried off in her room, she found herself thinking of Luke, of his calm eyes, his steady voice, and the quiet reassurance he had offered without demanding anything in return. In the weeks that followed, Clara noticed more subtle ways in which Luke changed the way she experienced the ranch. He taught her how to read the animals' behavior, how to anticipate the land's needs, and how to move confidently even in the face of uncertainty. He never demanded friendship or trust, only offered it in quiet increments that Clara could accept at her own pace. Through him, she began to understand the value of patience, observation, and gentle guidance. And yet, life was never easy. There were moments when the weight of her marriage, the enormity of the ranch, and the isolation of her circumstances pressed down on her again. Clara would retreat to her room, staring out at the fields, and question whether she could ever be truly happy in a life that had been forced upon her. But each time Luke's presence, sometimes just a shadow in the barn, sometimes a quiet word or a gesture, reminded her that even in a constrained life, there could be kindness, understanding, and the possibility of connection. By the end of this period, Clara had begun to transform in ways she had not anticipated. She still feared the future, still felt the sting of having her freedom limited, and still struggled with loneliness. But she also felt a growing confidence, a sense that she could learn, adapt, and perhaps even influence her own path despite the circumstances. Luke the quiet cowboy had become more than a helper. He was a teacher, a guide, and in ways she dared not admit even to herself, a friend. Clara had arrived at the ranch frightened, overwhelmed, and resigned to her fate. She had begun to see the vast land, the animals, and the people around her not as obstacles or burdens, but as a world she could navigate with care, attention, and patience. She began to recognize her own strength, her ability to learn and adapt, and the quiet hope that even a life imposed by others could contain moments of understanding, trust, and perhaps, eventually, love. And so, as the days turned into weeks, Clara's life on the ranch grew richer, not in wealth or comfort, but in experience and understanding. Luke remained a constant presence, steady and quiet, guiding without judgment, helping without imposing. Through him, Clara began to imagine that even in a life she had not chosen, she could find agency, confidence, and a sense of purpose. The quiet cowboy had become a subtle but powerful force in her life, shaping the way she saw the world and, most importantly, herself. Life on the ranch was never easy, but by now Clara had begun to feel more confident. She could navigate the barns, help with the cattle, and manage some of the daily chores with less fear. Yet, despite her growing strength, a sense of unease lingered over the land. The summer had been unusually dry, and the rivers that fed the pastures were running low. The cattle, usually calm and steady, grew restless and thin, and the workers whispered quietly about what might come if the drought continued. Clara noticed the worry in Ethan's eyes, though he rarely spoke of it. He moved through the ranch with a quiet authority, checking fences, reviewing accounts, and inspecting every detail. Even in his stern silence, Clara could sense the pressure building on him. One afternoon, she watched him standing on the porch of the main house, looking out over the fields, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. For the first time, she felt a spark of understanding for the man she had once seen only as intimidating and cold. He carried the weight of the ranch, and it was heavier than anyone could see from the outside. Luke was more present than ever during this time. He had been quietly organizing the workers, making sure the cattle were fed and watered, and repairing the fences that had begun to buckle under the strain of the heat. Clara often found herself following his lead, helping where she could, and learning how to anticipate problems before they became disasters. She marveled at his skill, not only with the land and animals, but with the people around him. Luke treated everyone with respect, giving instructions when necessary, listening when someone needed to speak, and always moving calmly, never showing panic or anger. One morning, as Clara carried buckets of water to the pastures, she saw a group of cattle trapped near a broken fence. Panic surged in her chest. She tried to guide the animals, but they stampeded in fear, nearly knocking her to the ground. Luke appeared quickly, moving with a quiet confidence that seemed to calm both the cattle and Clara herself. He spoke softly to the animals, guiding them back toward the safety of the main pasture, and then turned to Clara with a reassuring smile. "You did well," he said. "You stayed with them, that matters." Clara blinked, surprised. She had felt terrified, but his words made her feel proud. Slowly, she realized that bravery wasn't about being fearless, it was about facing fear and acting anyway. The days that followed were filled with constant challenges. Water became scarcer, and feeding the cattle required careful planning. Clara and Luke spent long hours in the sun, checking the animals, repairing fences, and organizing the workers. She began to notice the small sacrifices Luke made. He would skip meals to make sure the cattle were fed, stay late to repair a fence, and quietly carry out heavy labor without complaint. His dedication inspired her. She began to work harder, pushing herself beyond what she thought possible, and she felt a growing sense of pride in her abilities. But it wasn't just the work that tested her. Clara also had to navigate her complicated relationship with Ethan. He began to rely on her more, asking her opinion on minor decisions, and observing how she handled the ranch's challenges. At first, she felt tense under his scrutiny, worrying that any mistake would lead to criticism or disapproval. Yet as the days passed, she noticed something subtle. Ethan's respect for her grew. He saw her determination, her intelligence, and her courage, and though he rarely spoke it aloud, his gestures and the way he included her in decisions told her he valued her presence. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Clara found herself walking alongside Luke after a long day of work. They paused near a small creek, its water barely flowing due to the drought. Clara sat on a rock, her hands muddy and sore from the day's labor, and Luke settled beside her. For a long moment, neither spoke, listening to the quiet hum of the land, the distant lowing of the cattle, and the soft rustling of the trees in the breeze. "You've changed a lot since you came here," Luke said quietly. Clara looked at him, unsure how to respond. I guess I have," she admitted. "I never thought I could do any of this. I didn't know I had it in me." Luke nodded. "Strength comes in ways you don't expect. You've been learning, watching, and surviving. That's courage." Clara felt a warmth in her chest. Luke didn't just see her efforts, he understood them. It was a kind of recognition she had never received before, and it made her feel less alone in this new world. She realized that for the first time, someone genuinely believed in her abilities without expecting anything in return. The real test came a few days later when a sudden fire broke out in one of the dry fields. Flames leapt quickly through the parched grass, threatening the nearby cattle and barns. Panic spread through the ranch as the workers rushed to control the fire. Clara froze at first, her heart pounding, but Luke grabbed her hand and led her to safety while instructing her on how to help. Together, they guided the frightened animals, secured the nearby barns, and worked tirelessly with the ranch hands to contain the blaze. Hours later, when the fire was finally under control, Clara was exhausted, covered in soot and sweat. She leaned against a fence, breathing heavily, and watched Luke move among the workers, quietly checking on each of them and the remaining animals. She felt a surge of admiration and gratitude. He had acted decisively, calmly, and with unwavering focus, and she had survived because of him. That night, as she cleaned herself by the small wash basin in her room, Clara realized how much she had grown. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and danger, and she had discovered a resilience she didn't know she possessed. Her bond with Luke had deepened, not just as a helper or guide, but as a friend who had proven his loyalty and courage when it mattered most. Ethan, observing the events from his porch, began to show subtle changes as well. He acknowledged Clara's contributions more openly, asking her opinion on the recovery of the ranch, and even allowing her to make small decisions. While still stern and commanding, he no longer treated her as fragile or incapable. Clara began to understand that even a man as imposing as Ethan could recognize growth, determination, and strength in others. In the days that followed, Clara and Luke continued to work closely together. They shared quiet conversations during breaks, laughed softly at small mistakes, and celebrated minor successes. Clara noticed how Luke's presence made the work feel less daunting, and how his calm demeanor kept her focused when the pressure was high. She began to feel a sense of belonging, not just on the ranch, but in this small circle of trust and companionship that had developed between them. Yet the challenges of the drought were far from over. The land remained dry, the water scarce, and the cattle thin. Clara learned to anticipate the needs of the ranch, to think ahead, and to take responsibility for small but important tasks. Each day brought new lessons: how to repair fences quickly, how to ration water, and how to comfort an animal in distress. Luke guided her through these lessons with patience, never criticizing harshly, and always encouraging her to observe, learn, and act. Through these experiences, Clara realized that strength was not just physical, it was emotional, mental, and spiritual. It was the courage to face fear, the patience to learn, and the resilience to keep going even when the situation seemed impossible. And through Luke, she understood the power of quiet support, the kind that did not seek recognition but simply existed to guide and protect. One evening, after another long day in the fields, Clara and Luke stood side by side on a small hill overlooking the ranch. The sky was painted with the soft glow of sunset, the colors reflecting in the shallow streams and fields below. Clara felt a sense of peace she had never known. The land, once intimidating and overwhelming, now felt like a place she could understand, navigate, and even appreciate. Luke's presence made the challenges manageable, and she realized that she was no longer just surviving. She was learning, adapting, and growing. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the forced marriage, the fear, the loneliness, and the uncertainty. And she thought of Luke, the quiet cowboy who had shown her patience, courage, and kindness without asking for anything in return. Clara understood that her life, though not chosen, had given her an unexpected teacher, and that through struggle, she was discovering a new strength and sense of self. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Clara felt a quiet determination settle within her. She would continue to face the challenges of the ranch, to learn from Luke, and to navigate the complex dynamics of her life with courage and patience. She had survived storms, fires, and fear, and she had discovered that even in a life forced upon her, there was room for growth, understanding, and quiet joy. And so Clara's journey continued, not free from hardship, but strengthened by experience, guided by kindness, and marked by the growing bond with the quiet cowboy who had changed the way she saw the world. In the midst of drought, danger, and doubt, she had found resilience, companionship, and the faint glimmer of hope that would guide her through the trials yet to come. The weeks following the fire and drought had left their mark on the ranch. Clara had grown stronger, more confident, and far more aware of the land, the animals, and the people who lived and worked there. She moved with purpose, handled her chores with skill, and even began anticipating the needs of the ranch before anyone spoke of them. Yet despite her growth, challenges continued to test her courage and resolve. The drought persisted, Ethan's health remained fragile under constant worry, and the responsibility of the estate weighed heavily on her shoulders. One morning, Clara arrived at the barns to find Luke already at work, tending to the cattle. His quiet presence had become a comfort to her over time, and she realized just how much she relied on him, not only for help with the work, but also for emotional support. He had taught her how to stay calm under pressure, how to read the signs of animals in distress, and how to think ahead when the unexpected struck. Today, he handed her a bucket with a small nod, and for a brief moment, their eyes met in mutual understanding. Neither needed words, they simply knew they were ready to face the day together. The drought had left the fields brittle, the streams nearly dry, and the cattle weak from lack of water. Clara noticed a section of the pasture where the grass was turning brown faster than the rest. Without hesitation, she guided the workers to redistribute water, set up temporary feeding stations, and check each animal carefully. Luke followed silently, offering guidance and gentle encouragement as she made decisions. For the first time, Clara realized that she could handle responsibility not just for herself, but for the lives of others, human and animal alike. The sense of pride she felt was quiet but deep, a steady glow that filled her with confidence. Ethan observed her progress with a mixture of surprise and approval. He had always expected Clara to remain timid and dependent, but now he saw her taking initiative, making decisions, and showing patience under pressure. One afternoon, he called her to the porch of the main house, where the warm sun cast a golden light over the fields. "You've done well," Ethan said quietly, his voice measured but sincere. "I didn't expect you to adjust so quickly or to take charge the way you have." Clara felt a surge of satisfaction. It was the first time he had acknowledged her abilities without reservation. "Thank you," she replied, bowing her head slightly. She felt a mixture of relief and pride, knowing that her hard work had not gone unnoticed. But life on the ranch was never simple. One evening, a sudden illness began to affect some of the cattle. Panic and worry spread among the workers, and Clara felt her heart sink as she observed the animals struggling. She knew that without immediate action, some of them could die, which would devastate both the ranch and the people who depended on it. Her mind raced, considering every solution she had learned from Luke and from observing Ethan. She quickly organized the workers, assigned tasks, and even carried water to the weaker animals herself. Luke worked beside her, steady and calm as ever. He guided her decisions when she hesitated, reminded her to take care of herself while caring for the animals, and silently offered reassurance. Clara realized that their partnership had grown into something much deeper than simple friendship. It was a connection built on trust, respect, and shared responsibility. After several long, exhausting days, they managed to stabilize the situation. Clara watched the animals gradually recover, their strength returning with each passing hour. She felt a profound sense of accomplishment and gratitude, not only for the survival of the cattle, but also for the lessons she had learned along the way. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and immense responsibility, and she had emerged stronger, more capable, and more confident than she had ever imagined possible. During a quiet evening on the porch, Clara reflected on how much she had grown. She remembered the early days when she had arrived at the ranch, terrified and unsure of her place in the world. She had felt trapped by her circumstances, a prisoner of decisions made by others. But through struggle, observation, and the quiet support of Luke, she had discovered her own strength. She realized that even in a life forced upon her, she could find purpose, agency, and even moments of happiness. It was during one of these reflective evenings that Clara had a long conversation with Ethan. He spoke of the ranch, of the challenges he had faced, and of the respect he now held for her. He admitted that he had been wrong to assume she would be incapable of contributing meaningfully to the ranch. For the first time, their relationship shifted from one of obligation and distance to mutual respect. Ethan acknowledged her decisions, sought her opinion on important matters, and even allowed her to take charge of small projects. Clara realized that power and respect were not given. They were earned through perseverance, courage, and integrity. Luke, meanwhile, remained her constant companion. Their bond had grown stronger, marked by moments of shared labor, laughter, and quiet conversation. Clara began to notice that her heart felt lighter in his presence, that her fears seemed more manageable, and that the world around her appeared less intimidating. She had learned to trust, to depend on another without losing herself, and to recognize the value of kindness, patience, and quiet strength. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the fields, Clara realized that she no longer felt trapped by her circumstances. She had learned to navigate the complexities of the ranch, handle the animals, and guide the workers. She had discovered courage in the face of fear, wisdom in observing the land, and resilience in the face of challenges. Her life, though initially forced upon her, had become a canvas on which she could leave her mark. With each passing day, Clara's confidence grew. She began to see the potential for joy, not just survival. She laughed more freely, shared stories with the workers, and took pleasure in small victories, repairing a fence, calming a frightened animal, or seeing the first shoots of green return to the dry fields. She had discovered that even in hardship, life offered moments of beauty, satisfaction, and connection. The bond between Clara and Luke deepened further during these times. They shared stories of their pasts, hopes for the future, and quiet moments of reflection. Clara came to understand the depth of Luke's loyalty, his quiet courage, and his unwavering integrity. She realized that he had never sought recognition for his efforts, only acted out of a sense of duty and compassion. In turn, Clara's own confidence and strength inspired Luke, creating a partnership built on mutual respect and trust. The turning point came when a neighboring rancher offered to buy a large portion of Ethan's land, claiming the drought had made it unmanageable. Clara recognized the opportunity not as a threat, but as a chance to demonstrate her growing understanding of the ranch's needs. She presented a plan to Ethan, showing how careful management, water conservation, and worker coordination could sustain the land and improve its productivity. Ethan listened, surprised by her insight and conviction. After consideration, he approved her plan. Clara's success not only saved part of the ranch from being sold, but also earned her a lasting respect from Ethan and the workers alike. By the end of the season, the ranch had begun to recover. The cattle regained strength, the fields slowly greened with careful irrigation, and the workers found renewed hope. Clara felt a sense of accomplishment and belonging that she had never known before. She realized that she had grown from a fearful, uncertain young woman into someone capable of making important decisions, guiding others, and facing challenges head-on. Luke, ever by her side, remained her steady support. Their partnership had evolved into something unspoken but deeply meaningful. Clara recognized that she had found not only a friend but a confidant, someone who understood her without judgment and who shared her commitment to the land and its people. In Luke's presence, she felt courage, joy, and a sense of possibility she had never imagined when she first arrived at the ranch. Clara's life had been forced into a path she had not chosen, yet through perseverance, learning, and quiet companionship, she had discovered her own power. She had gained Ethan's respect, earned the trust of the workers, and found a mentor and friend in Luke. The challenges that had once seemed insurmountable became opportunities for growth, and Clara realized that her fate, while once dictated by others, was now shaped by her own hands. As the sun set over the fields one calm evening, Clara stood with Luke, watching the cattle graze peacefully and the land stretching endlessly before them. She thought of her journey, the fear, the loneliness, the hardships, and the small victories. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she had faced the trials of her life with courage and resilience. She had learned that strength came in many forms: patience, compassion, intelligence, and quiet determination. In that moment, Clara understood that life, even when it seemed forced or unfair, could hold beauty, purpose, and hope. She had grown beyond the fears that had once held her back, embraced the challenges of the ranch, and discovered the power of connection, trust, and friendship. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the quiet cowboy who had guided her with patience and kindness had changed not only her days but her entire life. Clara's journey on the ranch ended not with rebellion or escape, but with empowerment, respect, and a sense of belonging. She had transformed from a frightened, uncertain girl into a confident, capable woman, able to navigate her world with courage and wisdom. She had learned to trust herself, to rely on the support of others, and to find hope even in hardship. And as she looked across the fields one final time, the sun casting a warm glow over the land, Clara felt a quiet joy. She had discovered that even in a life she had not chosen, she could find purpose, friendship, and perhaps, most importantly, the freedom to shape her own path. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led her to a life of understanding, strength, and the quiet, enduring love of a steadfast companion who had taught her the true meaning of courage, patience, and hope.